Olá família, tudo bem com vocês? Para quem já é inscrito aqui no nosso canal, fique à vontade. E para quem ainda não conhece o nosso trabalho, eu me chamo Danilo Nobre e esse é o nosso canal Nobre Reino. Beleza? Aqui nesse vídeo eu vou mostrar mais algumas provas que não vivemos em um globo. Tá certo? Então, como é de costume aqui do nosso canal, fica o meu forte abraço e que Deus nos abençoe. Até a próxima.
84. If we move away from an elevated object, on or over a plain or a prairie, the height of the object will apparently diminish as we do so. Now, that which is sufficient to produce this effect on a small scale is sufficient on a large one, and traveling away from an elevated object, no matter how high, over a level surface, no matter how far, will cause the appearance in question, the lowering of the object. Our modern theoretical astronomers, however, in the case of the apparent lowering of the North Star as we travel southwards, assert that it is evidence that the Earth is globular. But as it is clear that an appearance which is fully accounted for on the basis of known facts cannot be permitted to figure as evidence in favor of that which is only a supposition, it follows that we rightfully order it to stand down, and make way for a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 85. There are rivers which flow east, west, north, and south. That is, rivers are flowing in all directions over the Earth's surface, and at the same time. Now, if the Earth were a globe, some of these rivers would be flowing uphill, and others down, taking it for a fact that there really is an up and down in nature, whatever form she assumes. But since rivers do not flow uphill, and the globular theory requires that they should, it is a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 86. If the Earth were a globe rolling and dashing through space, at the rate of 100 miles in 5 seconds of time, the waters of seas and oceans could not, by any known law, be kept on its surface. The assertion that they could be retained under these circumstances being an outrage upon human understanding and credulity. But as the earth, that is, the habitable world of dry land, is found to be standing out of the water and in the water of the mighty deep, whose circumferential boundary is ice, we may throw the statement back into the teeth of those who make it, and flaunt before their faces the flag of reason and common sense, inscribed with a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 87. The theory of a rotating and revolving Earth demands a theory to keep the water on its surface. But as the theory which is given for this purpose is as much opposed to all human experience as the one which it is intended to uphold, it is an illustration of the miserable makeshifts to which astronomers are compelled to resort, and affords a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 88. If we could, after our minds had once been opened to the light of truth, conceive of a globular body on the surface of which human beings could exist, the power, no matter by what name it be called, that would hold them on, would then, necessarily, have to be so constraining and cogent that they could not live. The waters of the oceans would have to be as a solid mass, for motion would be impossible. But we not only exist, but live and move, and the water of the ocean skips and dances like a thing of life and beauty. This is a proof that the Earth is not a globe. 89. It is well known that the law regulating the apparent decrease in the size of objects as we leave them in the distance, or as they leave us, is very different with luminous bodies from what it is in the case of those which are non-luminous. Sail past the light of a small lamp in a rowboat on a dark night, and it will seem to be no smaller when a mile off than it was when close to it. Proctor says, in speaking of the sun, his apparent size does not change, far off or near. And then he forgets the fact. Mr. Proctor tells us subsequently that if the traveler goes so far south that the North Star appears on the horizon, the sun should therefore look much larger, if the Earth were a plane. Therefore, he argues, the path followed cannot have been the straight course, but a curved one. Now, since it is nothing but common scientific trickery to bring forward as an objection to stand in the way of a plain Earth the non-appearance of a thing which has never been known to appear at all, it follows that, unless that which appears to be trickery were an accident, it was the only course open to the objector, to trick. Mr. Proctor, in a letter to the English Mechanic for October 20th, 1871, boasts of having turned a recent convert to the Zetetic philosophy by telling him that his arguments were all very good, but that it seems as though, mark the language, the sun ought to look 9 times larger in the summer. And Mr. Proctor concludes thus: he saw, indeed, that in his faith in parallax he had written himself down an ass. Well then, trickery or no trickery on the part of the objector, the objection is a counterfeit, a fraud, no valid objection at all, and it follows that the system which does not purge itself of these things in a rotten system, and the system which its advocates, with Mr. Proctor at their head, would crush if they could find a weapon to use, the Zetetic philosophy of parallax, is destined to live. This is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 90. Is water level, or is it not? Was a question once asked of an astronomer. Practically, yes. Theoretically, no, was the reply. Now, when theory does not harmonize with practice, the best thing to do is drop the theory. It is getting too late now to say so much worse for the facts. To drop the theory which supposes a curved surface to standing water is to acknowledge the facts which form the basis of Zetetic philosophy, and since this will have to be done, sooner or later, it is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 91. By actual observation, says Schedler in his Book of Nature, we know that the other heavenly bodies are spherical, hence we unhesitatingly assert that the earth is so also. This is a fair sample of all astronomical reasoning. When a thing is classed amongst other things, the likeness between them must first be proven. It does not take a Schedler to tell us that heavenly bodies are spherical, but the greatest astronomer of the age will not now dare to tell us that the earth is, and attempt to prove it. Now, since no likeness has ever been proven to exist between the earth and the heavenly bodies, the classification of the earth with the heavenly bodies is premature, unscientific, false. This is a proof that earth is not a globe. 92. There is no inconsistency in supposing that the earth does move round the sun, says the Astronomer Royal of England. Certainly not, when theoretical astronomy is all supposition together. The inconsistency is in teaching the world that the thing supposed is a fact. Since then the motion of the earth is supposition only, since indeed it is necessary to suppose it at all, it is plain that it is a fiction and not a fact, and since mobility and sphericity stand or fall together, we have before us a proof that earth is not a globe. 93. We have seen that astronomers, to give us a level surface on which to live, have cut off 1/2 of the globe in certain pictures of their books. Now, astronomers having done this, 1/2 of the substance of their spherical theory is given up. Since then the theory must stand or fall in its entirety, it has really fallen when the half is gone. Nothing remains, then, but a plain earth, which is, of course, a proof that the earth is not a globe. 94. In Cornell's geography, there is an illustrated proof of the form of the earth. A curved line on which is represented a ship in 4 positions as she sails away from an observer is an arc of 72 degrees, or 1/5 of the supposed circumference of the globe, about 5,000 miles. 10 such ships as those which are given in the picture would reach the full length of the arc, making 500 miles as the length of the ship. The man in the picture, who is watching the ship as she sails away, is about 200 miles high, and the tower, from which he takes an elevated view, at least 500 miles high. These are the proportions, then, of men, towers, and ships which are necessary in order to see a ship in her different positions as she rounds the curve of the great hill of water over which she is supposed to be sailing. For it must be remembered that this supposed proof depends upon lines and angles of vision which, if enlarged, would still retain their characteristics. Now, since ships are not built 500 miles long, with masts in proportion, and men are not quite 200 miles high, it is not what is said to be a proof of rotundity, but either an ignorant farce or a cruel piece of deception. In short, it is a proof that the earth is not a globe. 95. In Cornell's Intermediate Geography, 1881, page 12, is an illustration of the natural divisions of land and water. This illustration is so nicely drawn that it affords at once a striking proof that the earth is a plane. It is true to nature and bears the stamp of no astronomer artist. It is a pictorial proof that earth is not a globe. 96. If we refer to the diagram in Cornell's Geography, page 4, and notice the ship in its position the most remote from the observer, we shall find that though it is about 4,000 miles away, it is the same size as the ship that is nearest to him, distant about 700 miles. This is an illustration of the way in which astronomers ignore the laws of perspective. This course is necessary, or they would be compelled to lay bare the fallacy of their dogmas. In short, there is in this matter a proof that the earth is not a globe. 97. Mr. Hind, the English astronomer, says, "The simplicity with which the seasons are explained by the revolution of the earth in her orbit, and the obliquity of the ecliptic, may certainly be adduced as a strong presumptive proof of the correctness of the Newtonian theory. For on no other rational suppositions with respect to the relations of the earth and sun can these and other as well-known phenomena be accounted for. But as true philosophy has no suppositions at all, and has nothing to do with suppositions, and the phenomena spoken of are thoroughly explained by facts, the presumptive proof falls to the ground, covered with the ridicule it so richly deserves, and out of the dust of Mr. Hind's rational suppositions we see standing before us a proof that the earth is not a globe." 98. Mr. Hind speaks of the astronomer watching a star as it is carried across the telescope by the diurnal revolution of the earth. Now this is nothing but a downright absurdity. No motion of the earth could possibly carry a star across a telescope or anything else. If the star is carried across anything at all, it is the star that moves, not the thing across which it is carried. Besides, the idea that the earth, if it were a globe, could possibly move in an orbit of nearly 600 millions of miles with such exactitude that the crosshairs in a telescope fixed on its surface would appear to glide gently over a star millions of miles away is simply monstrous. Whereas, with a fixed telescope, it matters not the distance of the stars, though we suppose them to be as far off as the astronomer supposes them to be, for as Mr. Proctor himself says, the further away they are, the less they will seem to shift. Why, in the name of common sense, should observers have to fix their telescopes on solid stone bases so that they should not move a hair's breadth if the earth on which they fix them move at the rate of 19 miles in a second? Indeed, to believe that Mr. Proctor's mass of 6,000 million tons is rolling, surging, flying, darting on through space forever, with a velocity compared with which a shot from a cannon is a very slow coach, with such unerring accuracy that a telescope fixed on granite pillars in an observatory will not enable a lynx-eyed astronomer to detect a variation in its onward motion of the 1,000th part of a hair's breadth, is to conceive a miracle compared with which all the miracles on record put together would sink into utter insignificance. Captain R.J. Morrison, the late compiler of Zadkiel's Almanac, says, "We declare that this motion is all mere bosh, and that the arguments which uphold it are, when examined with an eye that seeks for truth only, mere nonsense, and childish absurdity. Since, then, these absurd theories are of no use to men in their senses, and since there is no necessity for anything of the kind in zetetic philosophy, it is a strong presumptive proof, as Mr. Hind would say, that the zetetic philosophy is true, and therefore a proof that earth is not a globe." 99. Mr. Hind speaks of two great mathematicians differing only 55 yards in their estimate of the earth's diameter. Why Sir John Herschel, in his celebrated work, cuts off 480 miles of the same thing to get round numbers. This is like splitting a hair on one side of the head and shaving all the hair off the other. Oh, science! Can there be any truth in a science like this? All the exactitude in astronomy is in practical astronomy, not theoretical. Centuries of observation have made practical astronomy a noble art and science, based, as we have 1,000 times proved it to be, on a fixed earth. And we denounce this pretended exactitude on one side and the reckless indifference to figures on the other as the basest trash, and take from it a proof that the science which tolerates it is a false, instead of being an exact, science, and we have a proof that the earth is not a globe. 100. The sun, as he travels round over the surface of the earth, brings noon to all places on the successive meridians which he crosses. His journey being made in a westerly direction, places east of the sun's position have had their noon, whilst places west of the sun's position have still yet to get it. Therefore, if we travel easterly, we arrive at those parts of the earth where time is more advanced. The watch in our pocket has to be put on, or we may be said to gain time. If, on the other hand, we travel westerly, we arrive at places where it is still morning. The watch has to be put back, and it may be said that we lose time. But if we travel easterly so as to cross the 180th meridian, there is a loss there of a day, which will neutralize the gain of a whole circumnavigation. And if we travel westerly and cross the same meridian, we experience the gain of a day, which will compensate for the loss during a complete circumnavigation in that direction. The fact of losing or gaining time in sailing round the world, then, instead of being evidence of the earth's rotundity, as it is imagined to be, is in its practical exemplification an everlasting proof that the earth is not a globe.